Okay, so several of you have been a bit curious about this instrument here. I know it looks a bit weird. Looks like perhaps it's some sort of microtonal lap steel, but it's something that I call an interval tapper, with the idea of each note that can be tapped at a fret position. Instead of just being a single note, you hear notes on both sides of where the instrument is tapped. It's been an idea for well over 15 years. It's been even sitting on the website there, just as sort of waiting in the wings there for something to happen. And finally, I've given up waiting for someone else to get excited about it and made this prototype. So it really is just a prototype to try some things out and to give people a better idea as to what the point of it is. So I want to first of all show you the concept of it, which I've always kind of considered as something a bit between a musical toy or a puzzle, because it's certainly something to wrap your head around. Musically, in the world of stringed instruments, usually we're used to strings going up in pitch and going down in pitch depending on how you're fretting them. Obviously this is the reverse. You're going up in one direction and down in another, and these intervals, as they change, they're not even intervals that relate to the same note. They move as well. It sort of adds to the confusion, and on top of that you've got the tuning that you've got the instrument set up in. At the moment, just to let you know what at the moment I've got it tuned up in kind of a family oriented way with like a root note, the fourth and the fifth on this side, and then the relative minors on this side. Okay, so that should be like a four, whatever the corresponding minor, and yeah, so you got like the two families, major and minors, as the root notes, which was just a result of partly because of the strings they had available, and just to see you had to start somewhere. Okay, so yeah, that's how it's set up. I suppose everyone wants to listen to hear it. In terms of the actual sound itself, it's not really any different than a regular instrument. Let me just plug it in here. Got this little transmitter. Let's see if that's on. Okay, so say with that tap note there, you're hearing both sounds. You're hearing the sound from this side, and you're hearing the sound from that side as well. So depending on where we are, we've got different relationships, and I'll try and explain that a bit better later on. But anyway, in terms of just the general layout of the instrument, this fretboard, the idea with the fretboards is to have a bunch of fretboards, at least at this prototype level, to try some ideas out. This one's obviously a lot more simpler than the one that's actually currently on it, and whereas this one is possibly even more complicated. Wow, depending on how you see these things. But the idea of these fretboards and the markers in particular is that the dots indicate a place where you can play, and the lines indicate a place where you can play and get a 12 tap tuning interval, and the lines indicate that okay, you could extend that interval out, and where there's no dots and no lines, for example, in a space like this, you don't play. If you want a 12 tap interval, if you want some random microtonal interval, yeah, you'll get sound out of there, but it won't necessarily be useful within the framework. The instrument itself. Okay, so these fretboards, they screw in from the back here. They've just got little inserts, and here you can see the electronics cavity in here. One of our standard sort of magnetic covers. The controls, we've got a balance. Obviously this is a stereo output, so you can split both sides left or right, so that this one is a balance control. You can switch between the stereo output being mono, or left and right, or right and left. Okay, so that's what this little switch is for. And this middle one is for tone. And it also got a push-pull switch incorporated. At the moment, it's just to turn the instrument on and off, but it has a more interesting future purpose that we'll probably talk about towards the end. So before we actually get into the intervals themselves on this prototype with this particular fretboard layout, I'd like to talk a little bit about where this idea came from and perhaps where it's going. So maybe we'll save the intervals for the end. And in order to give you an idea as to where it came from, let me just pop off and get another instrument, and we can talk about it there. Okay, so here I am back with a beaten up old guitar, and this is kind of where many years ago when I was a young fellow learning to play the guitar, it's quite noticeable, especially on an instrument that has a high action or a big curve in its neck. As you go higher up, you notice some strange things about the noise of the strings behind where you're playing. Okay, so when we're getting up to fret 15, for example, you can hear that actually, and in front of that note, you've also got this note behind it. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, so you've got a fourth there, which is interesting. If you take a step backwards, you've got bum, 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 bum. Now, as a young fellow, it's first of all interesting. You think, oh, those are intervals that I'm kind of familiar with musically, and it also, well, at least for me, creates the ambiguity of actually what the chord. You've only got these two notes, no? When you put them in the context of the two of them side by side, alright, those two intervals, two sets of two notes, you've already got a musical sense of where it's going, and in particular if you add a note which isn't there on top of it, which is common to them both. That's what sort of started me thinking, wow, it was quite interesting what you could do, perhaps, with the ambiguity of an interval, and start adding them together. Okay, along with that, let me go grab another instrument which kind of also pushed me along this route. Okay, so there's also something like this, not so much the instrument itself, but the idea of using secondary bridges and setting up a relationship between both sides. So if you listen to this side. Okay, so once again, we've got a separation of a fourth between one side and the other. And I'm just thinking about this and trying these secondary bridges out in different positions and looking at relationships starts getting me thinking, well, what about if we could fret these? Okay, obviously this instrument is more to be played like a koto style of things. But it got me thinking along these lines. Okay, let's go back to the tapper. Okay, so getting back to the tapper. In the interim, the wireless ran out of charge, so I'm cabled in now. This idea of taking a string and tapping it and ending up with the two vibrations on either side and generating that interval becomes more interesting. Well, I've already mentioned that an interval itself of two notes holds a certain ambiguity of its context. But when you start summing intervals with other intervals, it's where the whole sort of chord theory comes in. We know, my friend the fly. And that's where it starts getting interesting in terms of conceptualizing what you could do with tapping. One finger plays 2 notes, another finger you've already got a chord of 4 notes, a third finger you've got a chord of 6 notes, fourth finger you've got a chord of 8 notes. So that idea of summing intervals, I don't know, starts to become interesting. For example, I don't know if you've ever thought about these sort of things, but a classic major chord, you start off with a major third, but you're adding a minor third to give you the 5th. Okay, so you've got a bunch of relationships there. You've got this major third and a minor third, and the big interval is a 5th, and obviously you can add an octave on there. Anyway, that's what makes the fretboard layouts interesting in terms of what will be more accessible, what sort of intervals will be more accessible to the fingers. So now we can take a closer look at this, or in fact I'll probably put a chart so you can see exactly what we're doing. We can take a closer look at the fretboard itself. So in the middle of this one, we've got an interval of a minor second. Okay, I'll use this higher string. Okay, minor second, which by itself doesn't actually sound, it's pretty dissonant, but it's got some pretty cool uses. Again, once you start combining it with other intervals. Next to this minor second, got a minor third. As we move along, we've got a perfect fourth, another minor third, a minor seventh, a major seventh, a minor second. We can extend that out to a major second. Got another perfect fourth, and on this outer limit here, we've got a minor third. On the other side, basically this fretboard is symmetrical. Not all of them are, and not all of them, they certainly don't have to be. On the other side, we've got a little bit of a different relationship at this end. So when we get to a perfect fourth out here, that's a minor 6, and that can be extended out to a minor 7th. Whoop, a bit close to the pickup. Okay, so that's the idea, and in terms of how that might work out musically. I mean, if you analyze what we're playing there, we're playing a minor third of whatever that note there is, and we're adding a perfect fourth, and finally adding a minor third on top of that, and we could even add another minor third way up there. String down there too. Okay, so just with a few fingers you can start summing them together, hopefully to make something interesting. The first way that I started thinking about this idea was that kind of chordal summing intervals. Another way that perhaps this sort of instrument could be of use is thinking more along little repeating loops of riff style things where you can fit a whole more notes than what you could possibly do digitally, I mean, using your fingers on a regular instrument. I mean, even just playing something. Playing something simple like that on this instrument, there's a lot going on in there. I mean, I don't even have a clue what that was, but yeah, that's another way of thinking it. And going back to intervals, when I was talking about the interval spaces themselves, obviously you can play across intervals and end up and make new intervals. For example, we haven't had an octave in there, but you've got an octave here. You've also got an octave here. And you've also got an octave here. Okay, and that could be on either side. So on top of having the intervals already marked out, you can also make new intervals by playing between the intervals. Okay, hope that makes sense. Okay, the last thing I'd like to talk about in relationship with this instrument is where it goes from here. obviously I'll be trying a whole bunch of stuff out and trying to communicate that to interested parties. To be honest, it's a little bit of a distraction to what my main work is with. The majority of my time is with the acoustic tappers, which is a great instrument to have in the world. This I kind of think, don't know that it'll be so great, but it also belongs in the musical world. And I'm at a little bit of a crossroads in terms of how far I can take it without any money being involved. I mentioned this business of this push-pull. The original idea is not only to have the tap notes, but to also have a polyphonic sustainer on each side, so that these chords, these intervals, can be used more like a synthesizer, a keyboard, where they infinite sustain on either side, and you can genuinely thumb and move from one chord to another without it removing some of the attack and decay of a typical tapping instrument, and that I find that quite interesting on top of everything else. But obviously, to get to that next stage, there would need to be some external investment. So currently, what I'm thinking is I will continue with my little fiddlings around with this and try to communicate what's going on. But if there's a small group of, I don't imagine there'll be very many of you, but if there's 4 or 5 of you that are interested in an instrument like this and helping push the development along, then perhaps we can get a little group going and make some decisions. I mean, there's lots of things to do with the form factor. This doesn't need to be a symmetrical instrument. It could be quite different in terms of how the tuning, how the bridge systems are done. This business of interchangeable fretboards possibly isn't the best for these instruments. Perhaps it's better to decide on one thing and run with it. All of these things require a bit more input and require at some stage some economic backing. So if that's something that's of interest to you, then please get in touch, and we'll see where to go from here. I think that's it. I don't think there's too much else to say for now, but please give me your comments to let me know where you think it's worth pursuing, whether you think it should be thrown in the too weird bin. Yeah, anyway, thanks for listening. Cheers.